Hi there. Welcome back to Real Film Chronicles. As always, thank you for joining us. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Brian.
And today we're going to be talking about a little film called Malignant.
Malignant. Looking forward to this. 2021 film, recently came out in the theaters, and I think this was also done like premium video on demand at the same time. Directed by James Wan, starring Annabelle Wellis, Maddie Hassan, and George Young. A variety of names that I don't recognize, but definitely recognize Annabelle Wallis from a few different films, including the remake of The Mummy, Guy Ritchie's King Arthur, and she was also in one of the Annabelle movies, Creation, which I don't know if I was not directed by James Wan. Yeah, I was looking forward to this movie, but I must say I did not really know it was coming out until it was out. Was this on your radar at all?
Not really. I don't know. James Wan is one of those he's so prolific now. I mean, he's got to be a huge moneymaker because he's done Conjuring.
Yep.
He's done the Saw franchise, the Conjuring franchise. I think he directs the first movies, and then I think he produces the rest of them. I think he directed Conjuring and Conjuring 2, and then he produced the other Conjuring verse movies. And I think he wrote number 3. But between was it Conjuring and is it Insidious?
Insidious. He directed Saw, Insidious and the second Insidious.
I mean, he's like a $1 billion. He's a franchise machine, this guy. He's a pretty prolific guy. He directed Aquaman is another one.
Aquaman. I mean, you've made it big when you get to direct one of these $1 billion movies, right?
And then he's part of the Fast and Furious family. He directed number 7.
Yeah, that's right.
So this guy, I mean, this guy knows how to direct. I think he's most known for his horror films, but he knows how to do action as well. He knows how to block a scene out. I mean, this guy it's weird. Like but he still, for me, flies under the radar a little bit. It's like, I don't always hear about his new films coming out. So Malignant, I was kind of aware of it in the background, but it wasn't like on one of the big films on my radar, or even one of the bigger horror films on my radar this year.
Yeah, no, for sure. this one seemed to come out of nowhere. I almost had to like scold myself. It's just like, I can't believe I didn't know a new James Wan movie was coming out so soon. And I've always I love the first Conjuring movie. Insidious, I do also love those movies as well. Obviously the first Saw is like a masterpiece.
It's a classic.
It's a classic, right? Aquaman, I mean, it's one of those films. I'm not sure if like his own style was that noticeable in the film, and I'm kind of curious on your thoughts on Furious 7, which he directed. Did that feel like a different film than the rest of the Fast and Furious movies, or did it just get kind of caught up in the franchise feel?
Well, I might be biased here because I do love the Fast and Furious franchise. The whole thing's a tongue twister, but I really enjoyed 7, and I think it did a good job of like fitting in well with the rest of the series, but also having James Wan be able to put his mark on things. Whereas I felt like Aquaman, I think it's really difficult for directors or actors. I mean, you get pulled into the orbit of one of those big studios like Marvel or DC, and everything kind of gets a little bit more homogenized, right? You have to have a really strong voice, a really strong authorial voice, like someone like a Sam Raimi, I think, coming up with Doctor Strange 2. I think we'll be able to see his kind of voice and his style poke through. Mm-hmm. But I think in that big studio system, especially with those big superhero movies, there's a tendency towards homogenization. I think Aquaman suffered from that a little bit, especially in terms of that final third act and that giant battle, which is a bunch of stuff on screen. Yeah. I thought that in terms of the rest of the movie was solid action wise and blocking things out. But I thought Furious 7 was James Wan was really showing us this is how you do an action movie, and he really, really cohesive action scenes and really easy to follow action scenes, right? I think Furious 7 really spoke to his action credentials a little bit more than Aquaman, I think, just because, I don't know, it felt like he was more free to do his own thing and play to his own strengths. And which, I mean, he's a great director. And I feel bad that I overlooked this guy but I think maybe
Yeah.
that speaks to his strength. It's almost like, because when I think about favorite directors, I don't always think about people like Spielberg, for example, because it's almost like it's a given that he's in
Hmm.
there. And then with modern horror, I think it's just kind of almost like a given now that James Wan is just like, oh yeah, of course I love James Wan films,
Right.
because like it's just like it's almost like a given that you're a fan of James Wan if you're a fan of modern horror, right?
Yeah. Well, exactly. And I think we honestly that the modern horror genre right now has some thanks to give, like for his style, and a lot of movies I think have emulated that since. I think The Conjuring came out in around 2012, 2013, and we've seen a lot more of these styles of films. And I think I don't know, I think the genre is a little better for his presence in there. But it's also kind of funny you mentioning like his style and in terms of the Conjuring universe, really well shot films. And I can't remember which one it is because there's a whole bunch of them now. There's the Annabelle series that, yeah, like you said, he's producing. There was the Nun movie, and I think there was a La Llorona as well. And I don't remember which one it was I was watching, but he was producing it. He was not directing it. But one of the best scenes in the movie, I'm reading the trivia afterward, is the one scene of that movie he did direct himself. It's just like, oh, like he was able to elevate that scene beyond the rest of the crew, whoever else was directing it, which was kind of funny to see. It's just like, I want to see more movies directed by this guy. I want to see his visual style applied to these genres here. It's really good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. You're not going to find any of that shaky cam nonsense. You're going to find a lot of movement in the camera. Like in Malignant, there was some
Oh
pretty
yeah,
crazy action scenes, it turns out. But it was all like super easy to follow. But still, you didn't sacrifice any of that kinetic energy or that momentum in
yeah.
the scene. And that's really hard to do. Like you look at a lot of action scenes now, especially, I don't want to rag on superhero movies because there's other action movies that do the same thing where it's just like a bunch of stuff and it's like shaky cam, or or the camera's moving so fast and there's so many cuts and everything that you can't follow the action that's going on.
Yeah.
But James Wan's style is just it's so clear, and there's a kinetic energy to his action scenes, but they're so legible and they're so easy to follow. Like you can tell
Hmm.
there's a focal point to the action scene or any scene going on. There's a visual focal point, and it kind of anchors everything there. And it's you don't appreciate it until you see all the other kind of imitators or other people trying to get to that level, where even something like as simple as doing a jump scare in a horror movie. And I think we were talking a little bit before about there's a certain kind of timing to horror, just like there's a timing to comedy. And I
Yeah.
think that James Wan has that timing both in terms of action beats and
Yeah.
both in terms of horror beats. Like it's something that probably is a bit of nature and nurture, right? It's probably something that comes naturally, but it's something that he's worked on and honed, I think.
And it's interesting. Like Malignant specifically does have quite a few action sequences along with its suspenseful horror sequences, and that's one of the notes I made during the movie. Is I want to take note of the different shots and visual flourishes that are going on, and I think it's all him, right? He's bringing this stuff in here. There is one, I don't want to talk about spoilers yet, so there's no spoilers at the moment here, but there's like a transition scene with our character sort of being like transported into a different reality, or like uh, she's having a vision maybe where the screen, her surroundings kind of melt away around her and morph into the other scene. And it's like, this is a transition that I haven't seen before. Maybe it's due credit to the special effects teams and whatnot. But I believe that direction is what brought us those interesting transitions. But also at the end of that transition scene, on her transportation back to her own reality, I mean, she's terrified. There's scary things happening. She's screaming, and when she's transported back, we get like sort of flash cut over to her house. Like she's sitting on the floor in her house, but she's still screaming. And there's like this warbly distortion, like visual distortion going on around her that like slowly fades away. It's like, oh, that was a really neat little touch on that, bring that back. It wasn't like another horror film, just like flash cut. She's screaming in her hallway or something. And then that's it. It's like, no, we get a little more with a subtle special effect there. There's a lot of neat things going on in this film.
Yeah, no, it was yeah, it was a neat little film.
So I guess we should take a quick moment to just give the overview of the film, right? So this is the as per letterboxed overview, and hopefully it is not too spoilery in it. But here we go. Madison is paralyzed by shocking visions of grisly murders, and her torment worsens as she discovers that these waking dreams are in fact terrifying realities. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that you've said before. It's like, I'm glad I don't read these before watching the movie. Not that, it would necessarily lessen things. There are a few twists in the film that are unspoiled by that overview, but
Yeah, it was really weird because I actually did read something similar, just like a quick summary of the movie before I started watching it. And yeah, like this is the thing because there's so many twists in the movie, and there's big. It relies on the twist and the spoilers. So like this, I was waiting for this to happen, and because it doesn't happen right away
yeah, yeah.
in the movie. This is a small part of what's actually going on.
It is, yeah, it's a reveal that happens later on, I guess.
Yeah.
But without talking about spoilers, let's give a quick recommendation. What is your overall feeling on the film? Would you recommend it to horror fans, or who somebody else? How do you feel?
So I'm mixed on Malignant. I know I was reading online. A lot of people loved it.
Mm-hmm.
Some people hated it. Like on the movie subreddits, people were loving the heck out of this movie. I'm gonna preface this by saying that Malignant is no Conjuring and it's no Saw. So for me, it was there was some really neat stuff in here in terms of storytelling and in terms of the visuals. And then there were some other things that just didn't click with me or didn't land, or it felt almost like it felt sometimes like it was like two or three different stories that had been kind of blended together. So like I would still recommend especially you get to like the second half of the movie and really like I guess the last third or last quarter of the movie.
Yeah.
Horror fans are gonna love this, I think. The first half is a little bit slow, but I think once you get through that, horror fans are gonna love this. James Wan fans are gonna absolutely love this. One thing that James Wan is great at is coming up with these original ideas that really capture people's imagination. You look at like the Saw franchise is still going on. It's being rebooted with like the Spiral movie, potentially movies. So yeah, I would absolutely, with not wholeheartedly, but I would definitely, it's definitely worth taking a look at this because it's very rare these days that you get an original idea and potentially even an original horror icon. Dare I say, going forward, to potentially compete with the likes of Freddy and Jason. So yeah, absolutely. I think I would definitely recommend this film with a few caveats.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing your overall score of the movie. I guess after we discuss it in full spoilerific detail. For myself, I was loving this film. I really, really enjoyed it. I don't know. I was just fully invested into it. Almost from I'd say the very first opening scene, I was just like, okay, this is feels almost like a bit cliche, but it's important to set up. Like we sort of come back to the scene. The movie opens up like 30 years previous. I think it's in 1993. And there's some crazy events happening. You're not really sure what's going on. And then the movie, I mean, it just, as you said, it starts out a little slow, but I was still invested in it right from the beginning. And it's honestly, it just never really stops for me. I was just loving it. And then that last half of the movie, you kind of know where things are going, and that's absolutely fine. I was just there for the roller coaster ride, and I was just grinning ear to ear for a lot of it. And when things were just like compounding on top of each other, I was just like, yes, please give me more. This is really fantastic. So there's some decent horror in here. I know we were talking before the podcast about like getting scared watching movies. I didn't really find this very scary at all, but I appreciate that they went into the gore side of things, and there's some really neat effects there at the end, or throughout, I guess I should say. Like the villain reveal at the end was just like, I'm loving every second of this. I don't know. It's a definite recommend for me. I just loved it. It was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun. It's been a while since I had this much fun in a horror movie, I think. And maybe that says something. It's not as much horror as it is. Like maybe is it a horror comedy? Would you say it has some comedic undertones to it?
This is the thing, because I was reading online, people were like, "Oh, it's like a horror comedy, like more in the vein of Sam Raimi," and I was like, I did not get that at all.
No, and I think I remember seeing something about that as well. And I was trying to, like, I had Sam Raimi in my mind while I was watching it. It's like, no, this isn't really the case. But
Some comedic moments, but not enough to label it. It wasn't like a horror comedy in the same
no,
sense that Evil Dead or like American Werewolf in London might be considered.
hmm
Even American Werewolf in London, I don't know if that would be horror comedy. I don't know. Or maybe Shaun of the Dead is a better example. Shaun of the
Shaun of the
Dead,
Dead is a good example
better
of a
example. Like
horror
that's
comedy. Yeah.
horror comedy because there's some like truly horrific elements in there, but like blended with the comedy. And this one is like it's not like, to me, a horror comedy. You could go in and expect things like I could be really scared or I could be like laughing the whole time. And it's like, and this wasn't that. But like it sounds like I'm a little bit more lukewarm on the film than you are. I enjoyed it, but maybe not to the same degree. I don't think.
And I think maybe it felt original as well, which I think I could get behind.
I appreciated that.
Now, that being said, I did read like a quick, I don't even know it was a full review. I was like going through Letterbox, just checking for general ideas before the movie. And I saw in one of the reviews a comparison to the movie Basket Case. And
I haven't seen
feel
it
like,
yet.
yeah, like I was thinking about this last night, knowing we're going to record, is like, if people have seen Basket Case, it might almost be spoilery for this movie because, and
Are you spoiling Basket Case for me now?
if
Now you gotta choose between me and your audience, Brian. Let's see.
oh
how
my God. Oh my God. Yeah. I mean,
Too
Basket
late.
Case
You
is
spoil
like
it for
this,
me.
it's this old, like early 80s, like low budget, like kind of schlocky horror that is much more comedic, but also kind of familiar to Malignant. Like if you've seen one, you're going to be kind of familiar with this, but I really like that this was, if this is, sort of a spiritual remake of Basket Case, that this is more serious and it's just kind of this modern take with really nice special effects and some good amount of horror. And I mean, some nice budget behind it for quality production value. All that being said, let's get into spoilers if we haven't already. I mean, maybe the case thing is spoiled for some people already. I'm sorry.
Just for like hardcore horror fans, I guess. Which maybe
I don't,
I may have just outed myself and been kicked out of the ranks of hardcore horror fans for not having seen Basket Case yet.
well, it's okay. There's 3 of them that you need to watch at some point. So
Put it on my list for my annual Halloween watch here.
yes, exactly. Nice little franchise right there.
But yeah, so getting into the movie itself, I mean, it starts off back in the olden days of what 1993. I think it was.
Which honestly, like when it says like 30 years ago, 1993 is like,
Oh
I
my
remember 93
God.
all too well. And we were definitely aging ourselves here, but yeah, go proceed,
It
please.
feels a lot longer ago than it should. But yeah, and it's classic kind of horror setup, which I appreciate. It's like in this, obviously there's some kind of medical facility, poorly lit medical facility, as they always are in horror films. And there's a doctor doing this little recording message, like whatever like case she's working on, and she gets called out. People are getting brutally murdered by one of their quote unquote subjects, and they eventually have to like shoot the subject with a not a dart gun. What is it called?
Yeah, what was that?
They sedate them with like a tranquilizer gun.
A tranquilizer, yeah.
Gun.
It was like a tranquilizer gun right out of
But even in
Jurassic
that
Park.
opening scene, you see like there was a bunch actually. I don't know whether it was like some deeper meaning, but a lot of people had their limbs broken and bones sticking out. It happened several times throughout the movie. It happened early on. And then we just get a hint as the subject is taken away. It's like it pans down. You don't get this full shot of the subject as they're taken away, but it's like it pans down to their socks, and you can tell it's a little kid because they have the little kid socks with like a face on it. And they say, and I can't remember what the doctor says, something about removing the cancer or something. There's a repeated line, and then we get like this great opening credit sequence. By the way, it's this great spooky sequence of like just like close-up shots or random shots of like surgeries and amputations and blood. And we find out later that the surgery is actually in a specific context in the film. but like just up front, it's just like it's super creepy and super gross, and it was a great way to introduce a horror film, and this horror film specifically, which dealt a lot with that body horror, I think, and that
Yes.
that gore, which they could have leaned into a little bit more. I felt like a couple scenes, especially that police station scene, I think there was like CG blood. I don't know if it was all
Yeah, I mean, the
squibs.
police station scene was,
I don't know. It was like it didn't feel as visceral as something like I don't know what would be a recent one. Maybe Midsummer didn't feel like it was using
yeah.
special effects when it felt like there was blood and gore. It felt
There was a lot
creeped
more
out.
impact in other films like Midsummer,
Yeah,
especially referencing that police station scene. It's like that is where we go back to the action. And it's like that felt like an action scene where it was almost like a scene out of 300,
yeah,
where there's just like this the killer's wielding this big blade and just like almost in slow motion, cracking people's bones, removing people's arms, slicing through their faces. There's just like the whole thing may as well have been
yeah. And then
CG.
and so for me, it was a little bit disjointed because we cut from that opening scene of like this hospital and the kid, and they're doing surgeries on the kid, and then we find out later, maybe it's sooner, like they're doing like reconstructive surgeries on kids as well. So I was like, okay, something's going on here.
Yeah.
But it cuts to completely, well, it's not a completely different person because it turns out it's one of the kids that was in that institution. But there's the woman, I don't know, Madison,
Madison. Yeah.
Madison, aka also known as Emily, I think
Yep.
was her birth name, and she was
Yeah.
adopted and all this stuff. But she's pregnant, and she goes home to her. It starts off with her coming home to her abusive husband, who
Yeah.
winds up pushing her again, like not just pushing, like it was super uncomfortable and
Oh,
super
it
violent.
was violent.
When he like,
And yeah, it was horrific on its own right because it's like, oh my God. I mean, I know a lot of horror movies have like political and social commentary and are tackling other issues. And it's like, oh, is this movie about domestic abuse? And it was so literal. It was almost off putting, but it was also like, oh, that is really scary because he's trying to watch, I'll say RFC, not UFC. It was on the TV.
is that what it said?
I guess they couldn't get the UFC name. Yeah.
Okay.
And she comes home and she's pregnant. And he's basically just like, get out of here. I'm trying to watch this fight, right? And I can't remember the argument they're having. And he slams her head against the wall. It's really horrific.
Very brutal.
And she is able to lock him out of the room after that. But that is really, it wasn't just, I was thinking, oh, this is kind of a little tropey. They're just taking extra care to show us what a jerk this guy is, right? Because very shortly afterwards, everyone goes to bed. He's sleeping on the couch downstairs. He hears some noises. He gets up to investigate, and he's just like brutally murdered down there. And then the attacker runs upstairs and like gets Madison, right? And it all goes to black, and she ends up waking up at the hospital later on. But yeah, I mean, in the full context of the movie, that slam against the wall is what awakens the killer.
Yeah,
What was his name?
Gabriel. Yeah. Do we
Yeah.
give away the game right now since we're talking spoilers?
Yeah, we're talking full spoilers
So-
here. I think it was really important. It was nice that it set that up earlier in the film.
It
And
did, yeah.
They were sort of referencing later on, but it's like, it was kind of like, oh, the audience feels smart. They can piece this together because
Yeah.
Gabriel is a parasitic twin that they basically pushed back into her brain. So the twins shared a brain.
So yeah, so
right?
when they do the reveal at the end, and this parasitic conjoined twin is essentially like, if you look at Madison on her back, is like this gross face on the back of her head, and like he's got like a partial body, almost looks like a twisted version of like Quado from Total Recall.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the little
That was my
arms.
thoughts exactly.
So
yeah.
what they ended up doing, the big reveal is like, because they were like essentially two individuals but sharing the same brain. But it was like a weird kind of connection. But what they did was like they removed as much of Gabriel as they could, and then like surgically kind of concealed the rest of him as best they could behind her skull and her other body parts. I don't know how that worked in the spine because he obviously had like a rib cage and everything. It was
I think they basically tossed most of it.
yeah, because they couldn't fully remove him because it would kill Madison, or there was some kind of
Well, I think the thing is that because they shared a brain, they couldn't just like slice through the brain to separate them. So they're like, okay, they removed as much as they could, and literally, like, I think the scene is them shoving the extra
the
brain into
the
her
rest of the
skull and
face,
then like
which
sewing it up.
yeah, I think like the face
Yeah,
is
the
almost
face.
connected to the brain directly itself, and it's like
Yeah, and there were like eyes and things on that thing too, right? There's
oh
eyes and
yeah,
like teeth and whatnot.
which
It was
apparently
really gnarly.
too is like tumors. If you look it up, don't
Yeah.
look it up, but look it up, but don't look it up. But tumors can actually grow because it's like just different cells from your body, so they can actually tumors can grow like eyes and teeth and hair and stuff, and like
Yeah.
and full like I think full organs, but like tumor, it's really weird and bizarre. But that was the whole thing is like essentially like Emily slash Madison or Madison slash Emily had Gabriel, this other being inside of her, and essentially
Yeah.
partially through therapy and partially when she got adopted by this family and the family showed her, you know, love and affection, and then she had a sister
Mm-hmm.
who she was able to kind of rely on, and so she was able to overcome, you know, essentially kind of Gabriel was pushed to the back of her subconscious or whatever.
Yeah.
But then getting hit in the back of the head really hard, which is where Gabriel kind of quote unquote lived. That essentially was the catalyst for waking Gabriel up and setting the events of this whole horror
Yeah.
movie in motion. So it's kind of neat that
Yeah.
going back, and also it was kind of going back that there were clues at the beginning, and you see throughout the movie, I was like,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
like she would wake up and like her head would still be bleeding like days later. I was like, oh man, she got hit really hard.
Yeah.
Until I figured out the twist.
Well, that was the thing. It's just like she went to the hospital because she was attacked by the supposed home intruder, and 2 weeks later she's back home, right? She's back home, and the back of her head is still bleeding on occasion. It's just like surely they fixed her up, but they didn't really like call it out at all.
But what we find out is that it's bleeding because when Gabriel comes out, he has to like essentially her skull kind of opens up and his face comes out, which
It's so gnarly.
at the end, it was like, this is a really cool idea. And like, just the way he moves, because he has to like essentially move her body backwards. So like, he's like putting her shoulders at a joint so he can like move in his like his forwards is her backwards. But like the way, and I think they specifically hired like a dancer or something to get those, just like choreograph those really weird movements. And it's really unsettling. Like it reminded me of The Exorcist and like that scene where Regan comes down the stairs all backwards and spider-like, and like, anytime you go backwards like that, it's like there was something uncanny about the way they were moving through the whole. Gabriel was moving through the whole movie.
Loved every second of that. Like they must have had like a couple people, like you said, they brought someone in like almost a contortionist, and I'm sure they cheated in a few scenes there. But like there's multiple moments where it's like there's an unworldly movement to this person, and before the reveal that it is Gabriel inside, like controlling her Madison's body, it's like, what is this creature? Like this is really weird. It's supernatural and it's creepy. It's really creepy. I loved every second of that. I loved the reveal of this thing, like the skull, the back of her head splitting apart, and this little gooey brain coming forward. And it's funny because you actually saw this face earlier in the film, and you're thinking, oh, this is like a disfigured supernatural
it was
creature.
obscured because the killer always had long hair, and it was like half covering the face. So all you saw was like this weird disfigured eye and part of the nose and mouth.
Yeah.
So you didn't really get a sense of like how it fit into the body. So it was like, it was good about.
Yeah, because Madison has long, like brown hair or black hair, and it's just like, oh, it can't like fully pull apart all that stuff, but it's like it's got one eye it's doing all its activity with. It was so gnarly. I love that I don't know, I just love that aspect of the villain. Like I love the
It was a really neat idea, and I'm not usually one to think about these things as I'm watching the movie and guess it, but for some reason this movie, I felt like
you called it.
I felt like I was invited to, and I did call it about halfway through.
Yeah.
Did you pick up on this as well? Did you call it as you were watching? Did you figure it out as you were watching it as well?
I didn't pick up on the idea that it would like be a shared brain, that like the creature was coming out of her skull. I thought it was, yeah, that was pretty specific, but I did get the sense earlier in the film that it is the same person because, yeah, I mean, it felt like it was going to be the same person. It was Madison under some kind of hypnosis or something, like she has a split personality, anything. I didn't really realize they were going to go for the actual second brain.
Yeah, because I was trying to piece together like, and this is the thing where I talked about, like I mentioned, where it felt like it was almost like a couple different stories kind of almost stitched together. It was like that idea of the hospital and the reconstructive surgery on children, and that stuck out so much in my head. Is like that it was like so blatant. It's like this has to come into play later on, and so I was looking for ways it could come into play, and I was like, oh. And then as soon as I saw, I was like, oh, this child named Emily was like a patient of theirs, and it's like, and they're gonna age her up, and it's like, I knew then, it's like, oh, they're gonna age her up, and it's gonna be Madison. I was like, okay, like it seemed like I don't know, like they were trying to. Things were too telegraphed because normally I'm not the guy who figures this stuff out when I'm watching a movie. I'm not the person who's A, looking for it, or B, picking up on those clues the first time. And like for me, like I like to just go in and not like think not. And I'm not trying to solve the mystery, right? I want the mystery to be revealed to me.
You let the movie wash over.
And this one
right?
felt like
you let the mystery just.
This one felt like it was like almost like it was like broadcasting. It's like it was like daring me to like solve my mystery. And it's like fine then, I guess I will. But it's just like some really jarring things, or that the whole idea of like Gabriel / Madison had some kind of psychic power or some kind of electromancy power.
We need to talk about this because
it was just
we need to talk about this,
which is another element that felt like it was just like it felt like it was from a different script that just got tacked on in this one. It was really weird.
So it's established that Gabriel has the power to affect electricity. Which basically fulfills the horror trope of whenever Gabriel shows up at your house, your lights start flickering. So you go and investigate them, which makes you vulnerable to Gabriel's attacks. But Gabriel also had the ability to like make phone calls on your cell phone.
Psychically.
Or like psychically, because there's at one point Madison is being interviewed by the police, like in an isolated like interview room. And Gabriel phones the police officer. He answers, and he's talking to Gabriel while Madison is sitting there, really just doing her own thing. And at that point, I'm just like, oh, is it like ventriloquism or something going on here? But it's like, no, it's really undefined that Gabriel can like psychically make phone calls. And they really don't address that later on. Throughout the rest of the movie, I think it's just kind of a mystery.
This is one of the key problems I had, because at the beginning of the movie, it's like, oh, there's like, oh, try the electroshock on him. It's like, oh, he's like siphoning off the electricity. It's almost like he's drinking it. It's like, okay, but then he's manipulating electrical waves or radio waves to talk to the radio.
He would talk to people through,
and then talk to people through a cell phone, which I'm not sure. Like, is he sending signals to the actual cell phone tower? Because that's how it would work, right? It's like. So he's got to essentially send out psychic waves to the cell phone tower that pings back to this.
He must have good cell rate.
And this is one of the things that kind of took me out of the movie, where it felt like the seams were showing just a bit. Was like, it seemed like, and this is the problem I think, that maybe James Wan, because he was one of the story by credits as well, so he was one of the writers on this.
Yeah, maybe
getting inside his own head a little bit, where he felt like everything felt like just a little bit too meta. If it was like things were meta, but not self-aware of that meta-ness. Like the movie was still too serious, but also that, because it was constantly doing these misdirects where it's like, oh, you thought it was going to be demon possession, where even at the beginning it was like the couch cushion started to rise as if someone had just gotten up. I was like, but like looking at the rest of the movie is like, well, how is that possible then? And then like the whole flickering lights thing, which is a trope, even in the Conjuring universe, like that's electrical interference with and ghosts kind of go hand in hand. And so it was like misdirecting. It's like, oh, you think it's going to be a ghost, but it's not a ghost. And it's like, even like shots was like at the beginning when the abusive husband, I don't even know that jerk's name, but he's in the kitchen, he's investigating these weird things, and like close up on the blender as it's going, he goes to turn it off, and there's a close up on the blade. It's like, oh, is he going to get his hand cut off in the blade? It's like, no.
Yeah. But complete misdirect.
But it feels like there were such obvious misdirects. It was leaning so far into misdirecting people, so far into that meta game of that it kind of lost focus on the narrative itself and the storytelling. And that's why I kind of said, is like, it's not like, for me, Malignant, it's not on the same caliber as Saw or Conjuring, that were kind of like genre defining. I mean, like they came in as like, The Conjuring really came in and reinvigorated that, like, like the haunting and demonic possession kind of genre. And the Saw franchise, it was like, it reinvigorated, I guess, like the slasher film, but it was like its own, it was kind of revolutionary. It kind of revitalized, like James Wan came in and revitalized horror at least 2 separate occasions, revitalized the entire genre. So like, it's nothing against James Wan, but I think it feels like there was a couple different ideas from a couple different stories and scripts that kind of got mashed in that maybe didn't fit well
Sure.
with the
Yeah.
rest of it. And then all the meta stuff, it was just like, it was getting too meta, and it was getting like, the movie was too, it was too self-aware in the worst kind of way. And for me, that, like, that's why one of my big kind of nitpicks with the film is like these, like, not everything in a film has to make sense. Listen, the Evil Dead franchise, the continuity is completely crazy, bonkers, doesn't make any sense, but it works because it plays into that hard. Where this one, it felt like there was a couple comedic scenes, there was some horror, there was some drama, there was some supernatural elements, but it didn't quite mesh perfectly. Like, all the slasher stuff worked great. Like, all when it was revealed as like, okay, like, this is a slasher villain and he's going out and just slashing people. This is awesome. But you bring in the psychic stuff, and there's no other supernatural elements except for Gabriel Madison could sometimes talk through phones and radios and make light bulbs flicker or explode. I don't know. It felt kind of out of place.
Yeah. There's also like a kind of a thread in the movie that didn't make much sense at the beginning when the killer, like the yet unknown killer, kidnaps a tour guide and like brings her into, like, you know, his little area and keeps her there for whatever reason. And we go back there maybe once or twice before it's fully revealed. I would say a good hour after it happens, but you keep thinking about it, it's like, he kidnapped this woman, but he's killing all these other people.
Everyone else is dead, but this one he captures. Yeah.
Yeah, and it might be important to point out that the killer is killing all the doctors from 1993 that basically cured the cancer by essentially taking Gabriel out of Madison's body.
From Gabriel's perspective, they literally like chopped him into pieces and removed as much of him as they possibly could. So it's like, from his point of view, it's pretty horrific what they did. Even though, like, even before, one of the reasons they took him out, he was telling Madison to do bad things, or she was Emily before she was adopted, but it's like he was telling her to kill people even before, like,
when she was a child.
Yeah, so he was not, like, he wasn't innocent in all this either, right? But still, what they did to him was pretty horrific. So, like, yeah, it's gonna mess him up even more, right?
So that whole kidnapping thing doesn't really pay off until the very, very end, when Madison's sister is basically piecing together that that was her mother. And Madison thought that her birth mother was dead this entire time, giving birth to her, but she was actually alive and well, giving tours of underground Seattle. And so Gabriel basically kidnapped her. I don't remember to what end, but that's also it brings together this other complete misdirect that has no payoff. And I found it kind of strange, but by this point I was having too much fun, where the sister, and I can't remember her name, I'm sorry, is going out to investigate that hospital, which it looks so completely ludicrous. Like, it's on top of this cliff. It looks big and scary. It's abandoned. Like, it is.
Okay.
It's a haunted place. It looks crazy. Yeah.
One of the scariest scenes in the film, and for me, I'm not usually afraid of heights, but when she pulls up like right to the very edge of the cliff. It's like, I was like, she's going to drive off the edge of the cliff and die for no reason. This is insane.
I actually took a note on that, because it's like, I can't believe this girl drove that close to the cliff. Who would allow a car to get that close to? I mean, it's kind of established at the beginning of the movie that these cliffs are like 200 or 300 feet up over the sea. And it's like, there's no safety rail, there's nothing. And she just drives up there, gets out of her car nonchalantly, and just walks away. I'm like, wow.
On a path right next to that same cliff. I think the name is Sydney. I think her sister's name is Sydney.
Sydney. Yeah. Okay. So Sydney goes into this old hospital, and she goes down to the basement, and she even makes a joke. It's just, she finds all the records are in the basement. She's like, great.
Yeah,
right?
Of course.
She brings a flashlight. Of course, it's in the basement, and it's super creepy. It's wet. It looks bananas down there. And she finds the records. She finds all the VHS tapes. And then she hears a noise in the records room. She looks down at the tapes, puts the lid on the box, and then we literally cut to the next scene. She is safe at home watching the tapes. And I was just like, I'm holding my head thinking, what was the noise in the record room? Was it just some rats? Was it just her imagination? It did
Yeah,
not pay off
I
at
think there was some
all.
missing scene, and there's comedy to be mined from that. I think, right? From I think that there
Yeah.
was that was the missing layer of, what they should have shown was like, oh yeah, there was a rat or something, or it was like the old groundskeeper came in and scared her. Like there's like that
Yeah.
trope was like,
Like maybe, yeah, that would have been satisfying. The groundskeeper comes in, is like, "What are you doing?" And she's just like panicked. It's just like, "I'm just taking this." He's just like, "Yeah, go ahead. Like, who cares, right?
yeah,
Just leave."
but have something you could do a comedic moment like that, but like there was nothing, there wasn't any more context given, and I see like hints of possibly where this could have been like a full blown horror comedy like that, or with like I know.
Like that scene probably exists on the cutting room
Yeah, and
floor.
like Sydney was actually great kind of comic relief where like she was talking about at one
Mhm.
point it was like, oh yeah, you guys where like Madison was having what she thought was visions of the murders of these people, whereas actually no, like Gabriel was using her body, but like essentially creating like a almost like a hallucination in her mind. So she thought that she was like
Mhm.
witnessing it as a, but she was actually witnessing it through his eyes because she was there
Yeah.
bodily, but it's the way it's represented on screen is like she's having an out of body experience and witnessing this as a third party. And so like, and Sydney makes some kind of mention of psychics when they're talking to the police, because they go to the police as like,
Yeah.
it's like, oh man, like I'm having visions of this stuff, and the police are instantly, I mean, they're kind of suspicious, but not as suspicious as they should
Mhm.
be of somebody coming and saying they witnessed a murder.
Yeah.
But like Sydney makes some comment about the psychics, like you guys hire psychics to, for detective work. It's like, no, we don't. The one detective is like the budget Wanda Sykes there. I can't remember what the detective's name was.
Well, there's a really hilarious scene where Madison is like under hypnosis because like to get like evaluated to see what's going on.
Yeah.
Both police officers are on the couch. The lady a cop is basically furthest on the couch, and everyone else is like kind of like on the edge of their seat, fully into this, like they're listening every word. She's just like sitting back, completely relaxed. They're just like not believing a thing that's going on in this little hypnosis session. It was, I did have a chuckle.
But it was kind of neat when they said, it's like, okay, we have a hypnotherapist. We'd like to do like regression therapy, like, because Madison had like a mental block before she was 8 years old when she was adopted. And then like Sydney perks up. It's like, oh, hypnosis. And like the cop is like, it's not psychic. The hypnotherapist is not a psychic. And it's just like, you see the disappointment in her face. Like, oh. So it's like this little comedic beats like that, right?
Yeah. And there's a little like love interest there with between Sydney, the sister, and the male cop. I can't remember his name.
Kakoa Shaw. Such a cool name.
Kakoa Shaw.
Kakoa.
Yeah.
It's like
Very cool name.
That's awesome. I love that.
I mean, it looked when I saw him on screen, I'm be like, this guy looks like he belongs right in the world of Saw. Like he just has that look about him. It's just like he just came back from investigating some jigsaw murders. I think.
Yeah, the guys that actor's name, George Young. Yeah, I would like to see more of George Young in some stuff. He would be great as like, you think like,
Yeah.
I think like a young like Han Solo-ish type. Like I think he has that kind of potentially that roguish kind of charm, right? It's like it'd be interesting to see what else this guy can do. I've never heard of him before, but he was great in this. But there's like a love triangle between like Kakoa Shaw, Detective Kakoa Shaw, and Sydney. There was like a little flirtation that never went anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then there was also that CSI tech that kept, Winnie,
Yes.
Winnie, I think, right? Played by, was that Ingrid Bisu? I'm probably butchering that. But she kept like making these like, she make like these little hints. She was like kind of like nerdy, mousy, but she would make these little comments that shows she was interested in Detective Shaw. And neither of those things went anywhere. There was no like love triangle, and there was no like nobody hooked up. It was just like it was a thread that was kind of like dropped. It was really weird.
It just helped to add a little bit of depth to the characters and to the world to, I guess, make it feel a little
Sort
more
of, but again,
lived in, I guess.
The problem is like there was a couple setups with no payoffs. There were some setups that were paid off, but there were a couple things that just like just violated those kind of fundamental rules of storytelling. Where it's like, here's some setups, but there's no payoff at the end to wrap this up. And again, it's like these are some of the seams here that are showing in the film and in the storytelling and the overall story, I guess.
And I gotta say, I had a very nice payoff for me, at least. Like the final climax of the film, they're in the hospital room. Madison's birth mother is there. Madison's foster like stepsister is there, and Sydney is like under, like she's kind of pinned by this bed. Gabriel is in like full control. He's going to murder everybody, right? And Madison is kind of watching as she does in all the previous like reality bending scenes where she's a passenger to Gabriel's vision here, has no control, and she's kind of like learning. She's about to take control, right? And the movie's leading up thinking, okay, she's going to get control of Gabriel, put a stop to this. Gabriel has the gun. He's holding it in such a weird way because everything's all backwards because he's controlling Madison's body. Like he's holding the gun upside down to Sydney's head, and he shoots the gun and kills her. And I literally almost jumped out of my seat at this point. I'd be like, I cannot believe they just killed the sister. I cannot believe this. It's like this movie has been full of little misdirects and like false things that don't come to be. And then bam, they do this to me. And it turns out, of course, that Madison has created her own reality and trapped Gabriel in it. Like she is now in control, making Gabriel believe that he had control. I thought that was really nice. I mean, maybe it was telegraphed. I don't know. It seemed to be like a nice payoff from the previous scenes where she was distraught inside his realities.
I hated that. I hated that. It felt like such a cop out where it was just like, oh, so what I thought was going to happen was, and what to me would have made sense would be like, oh, because the whole thing is like at the beginning, she's like, oh, I never knew what it was like to have like a connection with a blood relation, which is kind of because then she revealed because she knew she was adopted, Madison that is, but like her sister Sydney didn't know that Madison was adopted. And so like she does this reveal and she's like, it's kind of a slap in the face to her parents and her sister who she lived with as a family. Is like, oh, I never felt a real connection to you. It's like, that's why she's like, oh, I'm so sad for losing the baby because I finally had a blood connection to somebody. It's like, and then at the end I thought it was like, oh, he shoots Sydney dies. And that's like the shock that she realized like, oh, that was my, like, forget about blood. Like that was my sister. And like, that was the impetus she needed to take control. And then she takes control.
I can see that.
But like this was it felt to me like such a cop out where it's like, oh yeah, we get to have our cake and eat it too. It's like the ending of Savages where people criticize that, where it's like, I don't know if you remember Savages at all, if you've seen that movie.
I don't recall.
Oliver Stone flick.
Go for it.
But without, I don't know, getting too much into spoilers, they have like, essentially there's like two endings. One is like, they have a crazy shootout that happens and a bunch of people die and the main characters, but then it cuts back to like, oh, this is what really happened. This is what would have happened kind of thing. So they show two different kind of endings. And it was like, oh, you get the shock value of killing Sydney, but then there's no consequences to the action. She doesn't actually die. But for me, it would have made more emotional resonance. It's like, oh, the motivation for her finally being able to take control over Gabriel again was like, no, like my connection with my sister, you killed the one person that I truly cared about in the world. And then she finds out too late that she did have that connection with somebody that she was looking for. But in the end, and that's the thing too. So like, so for me, it fell flat. For you, it paid off. For me, felt like kind of a cop out. But then the whole ending scene where she was talking about was like, oh yeah, I have this big connection with my sister. Like throughout, maybe it was just the chemistry with the actors. Partially was like the story didn't really give those two characters room to breathe with each other at all. But like, I didn't get any sense of real sisterly connection between them other than the movie like directly telling me they're sisters and they have a connection. It's like, but there was nothing shown between the actors or in the writing to show that they had that really special connection. I don't know.
You know, I can't fully disagree with some of those points there for sure. And I kind of wonder if like that ending was different, like maybe you shot and completed in the way that you sort of described, but you know, production interference, so to speak, or audience reaction to test audiences to be like, no, we need the sister to survive, right? And maybe it was also like, oh, we watch this product, it's like we might have a couple sequels on our hand here where we're going to need to bring some of these characters forward, right? But yeah, I can't disagree with a lot of those points there. There was some weird chemistry or lack thereof in the sister.
I don't know whether that's just like sometimes like just different people might not have that spark and might not play with each other, and that's fine. But it felt like also the writing just didn't give them the space to build that relationship. And then I think another thing that you mentioned is like, I saw right away as soon as like that such a cool idea for a killer was revealed. And they had that weapon where it was like that trophy. It was like the knife and the two snakes, like that common medical symbol. and like
Yeah.
Gabriel took that and sharpened that trophy into a weapon, and was like really cool weapon, really cool killers. Like I knew exactly, specifically from James Wan, who was the master of creating these really marketable, really profitable, really entertaining movie series. It's like, but it felt like a little bit too on the nose with creating. Like it seemed like
Yeah.
it was too forward looking to setting up more sequels. Is like, of course she's gonna get this under control, and her sister's gonna be there because they need that for the
Yeah.
sequel. Whereas like Saw or Conjuring didn't have that sequelitis kind of feeling, where they felt like self-contained narratives where you could watch this
Yes.
and they
Yes.
weren't worried about setting up the whole universe with the nun and La Llorona and the creepy doll that happened kind of after the fact. Or
Yeah.
Saw didn't feel like you can watch Saw and enjoy that movie on its own. It didn't feel like they were setting up specifically for 20
Well, there was no
sequels.
ambition. Yeah, exactly as I said. There's no ambition when they made Conjuring
Well,
or Saw or even probably Insidious that there would be continuing franchises. It's like even James Wan and everyone involved in creating these is falling victim to our modern like
yeah.
franchise, everything under the sun.
Yeah, I think not to say that the movie was terrible, and not to say that sequels aren't going to be good, because they're probably going to be entertaining, especially for horror genre. In the horror genre, that it was a new idea, and it's going to be really neat to see. I'm going to call it now. It is going to be really neat to see the sequels and where they take them. But for me, it just felt
Yeah.
almost too much like it was like it had that in the back of its mind. You can kind of tell in that ending. It's like, yeah, we're setting this up so that Gabriel and Madison don't die, so that they can be around for the next 20 sequels, right?
Yeah. The thing is, I find a lot of these horror movie franchises to be so consumable. Like they are so easy to put on and revisit. And I like
Yeah.
that they're not very heavy. This one, I don't think there was any crazy like special hidden meanings behind it. It just kind
No.
of seemed a little surface level, which is fine. I mean, I would give bonus points if it had more commentary about stuff, but the movie is what it is.
Yeah.
And do I look forward to more of them? Sure, but also I'm kind of nervous because honestly, like James Wan, Lee Whannell, who did Saw, right? I think probably they give equal credit to both for Saw. He created Insidious, he created The Conjuring, all this stuff. And he did like The Conjuring 2, which I quite enjoyed. And you and I
Yeah.
watched Conjuring 3 about a month ago, and I was not into it at all. Like it just felt like
Yeah.
such a different film. Insidious, he did 1 and 2, and then 3 and 4 kind of felt more like direct to video stuff, where, you know, as soon as Juan is out of the picture, his franchise, like his properties, just seem to kind of fall apart. It's just like, is he going to come back for a second Malignant, or did he do everything he needed to do for this? And just,
It's a case of, definitely those franchises are a case of diminishing returns. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's a problem, not just with these movies and the horror movies and James Wan. I don't want to single him out, because I think there's an ongoing trend in the industry where it's like we're constantly looking for the next series, and like what's the next
yeah,
billion-dollar
yeah.
franchise, and like putting out a product instead of trying to tell a story. And I think that it was a little bit more obvious that this movie kind of suffered from that mentality, whether it was from James Wan end or the studio's end, or it felt like some kind of that influence there. It was like, it felt very much kind of forward thinking to like, what's the next movie going to be, or how can we leave this in a place where they can make more sequels? Whereas, like
Yeah.
Friday the 13th, that first movie is like, they weren't thinking about sequels necessarily when they made that film. It was like, they went crazy, or Freddy or any of those ones, the first ones, like they weren't, I don't know if they were thinking about sequels at the time. I don't think so. When they made bank, they obviously did, but like they left everything on the table essentially, right? They didn't have those constraints where the studio was like, well, we're going to need to make 10 sequels, so you can't kill off this character. You can't, leave things in a permanent state where we can't come back from. You can't do this, or this. And I was like, well, all of a sudden you're constrained in your storytelling. And I think you get a sense that the walls kind of, there was a smaller box of sand, or a smaller sandbox to play in than maybe they had for like Saw or The Conjuring, where it felt like they were given more carte blanche because there was no expectations. Where like now I think like
That's
they're
right.
suffering a little bit I think James Wan is suffering a little bit from the weight of the expectations of all the success that he's had, right? And I think, yeah, I think I think to the movie's detriment, unfortunately, like it could have been, it was good for me, but it could have been great. And I think there was a couple minor touches, and it would have bumped this up a lot for me.
What's interesting, talking about like the original Saw, which had a micro budget, like a few
Yeah,
$100,000, I think. I don't know about Conjuring or Insidious, but I think they were fairly low budget affairs. Malignant had a budget of about $40 million,
really.
which is honestly pretty high for a horror film. And of course, it's going to be difficult to make that back in this sort of landscape right now with the pandemic still going on. But Wikipedia is telling me that it made $30 million at the box office, and that doesn't include all the video on demand stuff that I'm sure a lot of people are participating in. But that surely has to play a factor into it. I mean, a lot of these horror movies that are so good are made for $5 to $10 million. They make 30 or 40. They're huge successes, and you're going to be guaranteed sequels. We may not be guaranteed a sequel to this
Yeah,
one.
it's not Bloomhouse budget, right? Bloomhouse came in like, look at like something like The Invisible Man, or any of their recent movies, was like they do a really strong push to keep the budget really low and like focus on the story, get a really strong high concept, keep that budget low, keep everything profitable, and then you keep that going forward, right? So like this is not the Bloomhouse model here. This is like a studio like banking on James Wan's past successes
Yeah.
to make even more money here. So I think there's a little bit more cynicism. I think this movie's a little bit more cynical in how it was made, I think, than maybe some of those other franchises, right? Like than Saw or Conjuring, which feel a lot
Yeah.
more earnest. I mean, the Conjuring movies, they're so serious in tone, like all the characters in there are so
Yeah.
serious, but there's an earnestness to that filmmaking, that storytelling, that I think is lacking a little bit in Malignant. Despite the fact that it's like, on the other hand, it's like it's one of
Yeah.
the coolest slasher killer identities in recent memory, right? It's like, so it's like it's this weird balance. It's like I want to see more original ideas like this, but it just, there's something that just kind of
Yeah.
reeks of studio interference in this movie.
And yeah, honestly, you just kind of reminded me of that. Another thing I kind of liked about this was the pace of the action, or sorry, not the pace of the action, but the action sequences themselves. Like when Kakoa Shaw is chasing after Gabriel,
Okay.
it's like, this is a pretty intense chase going out on the streets. And I'm sorry, but like at one point, Gabriel slides into the basement
Oh my
of
God.
what looks like an abandoned building. And Kakoa has no problems just sliding into that window, like following this dude in there, right? This place is creepy as heck. Like it's bonkers. But that action scene was fun, like that chase scene, and of course the police
Yes.
assault was completely
Exactly.
bananas.
So this is the thing too, because I think James Wan has really gotten he started off with a lot of horror movies, but he's got his action bona fides now, right? So I think this movie, he's really showing off his action chops. I think we need to talk about a couple scenes here. One is that chase between
Yeah.
Shaw and Gabriel, like you're saying, and it starts off in the apartment of that one of those doctors that he was hunting down, and
Yep.
they have a little fight and a little tussle, and it's like all of a sudden you see is like, okay, this is not Gabriel is confirmed. He's not a supernatural entity. He occupies real
Yes.
space, and he's he's a person. So now he's like, okay, one mystery solved. Because before that, it was always kind of in that weird space. Like, is he a psychic projection, or is he some kind of ghost or demon or something? It's like, no, he's a physical person. He's out doing stuff. But then you at first, and you see him as like, you saw him before, it's like something kind of weird about the way he was moving. But then you see him go down the, like doing all the acrobatics and parkour down the fire escape. And you can see like his joints don't look right in his arms and legs. Like, it's moving really creepy. And it's really well shot. And then Shaw chases him down. He jumps a couple stories, lands on that. That's really hard on that
Oh man.
garbage. What am I saying? Dumpster. But the lid is, but you think he's gonna jump into like an open one, but it's like it's closed, and he lands on his shoulder for some reason instead of landing on his legs and rolling over.
Well, he did it on purpose, and you
Yeah.
could see him when he was jumping off. He wasn't jumping like feet first. He went off knowing
Into
that he
his
was probably
shoulder.
going to
It was
dislocate his
such a-
shoulder out of it.
It
Yeah.
was such a weird way to jump. But anyway, he's fine. And then they established earlier that the whole history of Seattle was like after there was a big fire, And then because of flooding, they just decided to rebuild the city like a story higher over the old city.
Yeah.
So it's like this
Which
really,
seems to be a lot more common than in the US.
yeah, I think they did the same thing in Chicago as well. I was reading about this
Yeah.
recently, or maybe it's a different city. Maybe it was Seattle again. I don't know. I could just be making stuff up, but like it's really creepy. And they're going through like all these old abandoned tunnels and old abandoned businesses and buildings and stuff. And they finally get this place, and there's all stagecoaches and everything, and all old timey
Yeah.
gear that was just left abandoned theoretically. And they have this big face off, and they're like having this like hand to hand fight, and it's actually really neat and really, it's not as tense as I thought. I thought, I didn't think that Shaw was actually in any danger, and it turns out he's actually
No,
fine.
yeah.
I don't know why that is the way it is. There was some kind of tension missing from that scene where like I didn't really believe that Shaw was in danger. Maybe because he was just like too good looking and he was like friends with the main characters. I don't know. But anyway, like, and they have little tussle. But then again, it's like you see Gabriel escape and he's doing like these little parkour moves up and he gets out to the roof and is like, but it's dark, but you can see what's going on. And it's just enough to get that sense of like this person's moving really weird, really something really uncanny about the way they're moving in their environment. And it's just like something really creepy and unsettling just watching Gabriel move in that fight and then climbing up the side there, escaping through that hole in the roof. But just a great scene all around.
And then that uncanny movement is like amplified even more so in the police station. I guess, well, before there, Madison's brought into the jail cell, like this open jail cell with,
Right.
I don't know, I want to say 20 other
Second
women.
scene, yeah. The holding
And
cell.
a couple of the girls start picking on her. Yeah, holding cell, sorry. A couple of the girls start picking on her and actually push her to the ground, just start kicking her just for being who she is, I guess. And of course, Gabriel emerges and takes action and just starts breaking bones, crushing skulls with her feet. Like, it is grotesque. Yeah. It is horrific, but it's also just like, this feels like it could be from a different movie, right? This is like from some crazy action
film. The tone definitely changes a couple times here. And like, it's also established, I think it's important to mention that Gabriel / Madison, something else also gives them like super strength as well.
Possibly,
it comes up a couple times where like, I think they mentioned like the abusive husband at the beginning where it's like, the CSI person was like, I've seen, or the medical coroner, maybe it was, whoever was investigating, is like, I've seen injuries like this, but like mostly from a car crash because it was so brutal. And you saw like the neck was like dislocated in the bone, this part of the spine, part of the spine was sticking out. So like, I think they mentioned also in other scenes was like Gabriel has super strength and then Madison taps into it at the end. But like the breaking bones and just the way that they're moving kind of backwards where like he pops his like the shoulders out of joint and everything to get ready for his forward facing mentality, but it's like murders that whole group of like 20 women and the cop who comes to like to save them, see what's going on. I was like, I thought there'd be security cameras in there, but apparently not. But just a brutal scene, tons of gore for the gore lovers. Yeah. And just like really, again, creepy. And there's a little bit of humor there in that. So, you know, that first woman who starts picking on Madison there, that's actually Zoe Bell. I had no idea because I think they made her up to look a lot older than she was and a little more trashy. But that's Zoe Bell, who people might know. She's a famous stunt woman, or stunt coordinator, or stunt artist. I don't know, stunt person. Stunt person. Yeah. She worked on a lot of Tarantino movies. She even starred in Death Proof. But that was her. She's unrecognizable. But she was going around like trying to escape Gabriel, but she was like throwing her fellow inmates in the way to try and like buy her time to escape. Luckily she gets it in the end too. But like there was like somebody's head got crushed. Like Gabriel stepped on their head and crushed it. There were broken bones. There were just people's throats. He reached over one time, just like with his hand, just ripped somebody's throat out. Yeah. pretty gory. There's some neat gore in there.
It was very, very gory. And it just got even worse when Gabriel and Madison get out into the regular police precinct office, which I took note of as well. It looks like it was an old abandoned, some kind of transportation station or something, like huge cathedral ceilings, all tile floor. Like it had a very distinct style to it.
Something out of either the Batman the Animated Series or the Batman Nolan films, where it was just like that architectural touch. The only thing I didn't like about the police station shootout scene there. After she escapes the cell, she gets out and then she takes on all the cops and just murders a bunch of cops. She doesn't care who she kills. She kills criminals. She kills cops. Everybody between, or
Yeah.
he/she. But it's like it was really really dark in there, and it made it a little bit harder to see what was going on. I really wish it was like a little bit more brightly lit, so you could see
Yeah.
every kind of every bone breaking, every throat stabbed. I just wish it was a little bit
Well,
brighter.
yeah. I mean, it's like at that point, they kind of have to start hiding a few things
I
because
guess.
there's like 30 cops in this room and they're all starting to take shots at Gabriel and Madison. And it's like, surely someone must be able to put a bullet in this person. Like, and it's just like, no, cartwheeling around, parkouring off desks and breaking necks and tearing people's arms off. It was a
I
gore
guess
fest at
it's
that
not
point.
bad for somebody who's been asleep for 30 years. It's pretty good.
Yeah. Well, this is the other thing. Gabriel, I mean, I'm glad you brought up that thing about maybe having supernatural strength because Gabriel must have been taking control and bring Madison to the gym a lot more often
No,
than was alluded to in
no,
the film.
they literally say that Gabriel has higher strength. He has
And I guess it
superhuman
makes
strength.
sense since, I mean, even though it's unexplained why Gabriel
It's
can,
unexplained, but
make cell phone calls with his brain, it's just, it stands to reason that they would have increased strength as well. It's just like a no-brainer.
why not? I guess it's like it's like maybe a surge of adrenaline gives him extra strength. Who knows? But it's like another thing that's not kind of mentioned. It's mentioned once or twice, and then they kind of forget about it. But yeah, so like, but the whole scene is still like it's a little bit too dark for my liking. But like it's so well choreographed, you can still follow what's going on. You can
Yeah.
still see it's like you can
Oh,
still
yeah.
get a sense of place and a sense of movement within that place. So you're just like, oh no, these cops are over here and those cops over there, and they're like end up like kind of shooting at each other because they're in the dark
Yeah.
and they're shooting. It's like okay, you sense that Gabriel's here and he's moving from there to there, and it's like it's very well. You can tell they went through a storyboard. They thought it out really thoroughly and they filmed it. The way they filmed it was like really, really clear what was going on. I just wish that just like bring that lighting level up just a couple notches just so we could see.
Maybe you need to watch the HDR, the 4K HDR version to get a little
Maybe.
extra brightness in there. Maybe.
But overall, yeah, again, it felt like those action scenes felt like they were their own movie, right? Like felt
Yeah.
like they were their own. It was such like a jarring kind of genre shift. Whereas like you look at like the old kind of killers like Michael Myers or Jason,
Well,
even
yeah.
Freddy, who was kind of quicker on his feet. He was never doing parkour and cartwheeling around and stuff.
And I think that is honestly like a direct correlation between budget and having like slow moving like villains
Yep.
that don't do a whole lot except just they get on top of you, they kill you right away. This one, with all that budget, like that scene alone, like the jail cell and the police station scene, that combo, like this 10, 15 minutes of film, probably cost a lot of money, and that would have just been completely excised out of a lower budget film.
Yep.
And is the movie better or worse for it? I was in the mood for it. I appreciated the mixture of these two genres, and I liked that James Wan can competently direct both styles of films. And that's where I kind of ended up at with that action scene.
Yeah, well shot action scene, but like again, some of the seams were showing. It felt like again, that's where it felt like it was like a couple different movies or scripts that were kind of like stitched together. I don't know.
Yeah. So, with all that being said, is it time to talk about your score? What do you rate this film?
Yeah. So, like, I think it's pretty obvious in talking about this that I'm kind of on the fence about this, but I think I would have to give this a 3 out of 5.
3 out of 5.
3 out
Really?
of 5. It's a really solid film, really well made, really neat idea, really for a horror villain, and I can see the franchise potential. I mean, this is in a couple of years. I can see, potentially like you're gonna see Gabriel join the horror pantheon up here with Freddy and Jason and Michael Myers and Jigsaw, another James Wan creation. But again, it's like it felt like there was that kind of that cynical input from maybe the studio side of things, maybe James Wan getting inside of his own head a little bit and trying to like push himself too far to like, so many different misdirects. It felt like we were misdirecting the misdirects. and like
Hmm.
getting so kind of like all this kind of meta, like kind of trying to outsmart the audience, and then feeling like it was like a bunch of ideas where if they would have pared down like the electrical control stuff, they would have pared down the super strength stuff. They would have made it like more straight horror or more straight action,
Yeah.
or played or made, if you're gonna make it a horror comedy, make it a horror comedy. It felt like it was never really decided really what it wanted to be, and so it fell a little flat for me. But I didn't hate it, right? I don't hate this movie. I give it a 3 out of 5. I would recommend it to people to watch, but it's not going to be. I don't think for me it wasn't genre defining. This is not like
Yeah.
the horror movie of the year for me or of the decade. I don't think it's a clear home run like some of Wan's other movies.
That's pretty fair. I'm honestly a bit surprised that you would still rate it as highly as 3 stars out of
But that's
5.
only
But
3 out of 5 is only it's
respect.
60% though. It's like it's not super
Yeah.
high. For me, it's like an average rating. I don't know.
Maybe like I know what I'm gonna rate it, and maybe that's why I'm thinking, oh man, maybe he should rate his lowers because I was leaning more towards 3.5 stars for this film, and I feel
Okay.
like I was a lot more positive on the movie. I'm willing to let go of a lot of these things, right? Like it didn't bother me, and honestly, it might just be circumstance. You know, a long rainy day. Watch this on a Saturday night. Nice big bowl of popcorn. It's been a few days. Cold soda. This just scratched the itch that I didn't know I had on Saturday night. I really had a lot of fun with it. The issue is I'm not going to go into 4 star territory because I didn't feel like the movie had anything more interesting to say than just being sort of like a surface level,
No.
like piece of entertainment
I
that I
mean,
can
if you
consume.
want to like compare it, I compared it to like some of my gold standards now. If you look at Ari Aster, I think is it Ari Aster
Sure.
who did
I don't know.
Hereditary and Midsummer?
Yeah.
But Hereditary and Midsummer for me was like, yeah, it's the horror genre, but like you could deep dive into those
Yeah,
movies, and you could take a
exactly.
really deep dive. Even something like In the Earth, which I wasn't really keen on, but then you could peel back some layers on that a little bit.
Yeah.
And then like stuff like Resolution or The Endless. I keep coming back to this, but you could go down and look at some different layers. Even if you didn't like the films, there was different layers of meaning where I felt like this was just more kind of straight up. It was just what you see is what you get, and I did give
Hmm.
it point like for me is like yeah it won me over a little bit more with the originality, right? You come up with an original idea. It's not just another demonic possession. It's
Hmm.
not just another haunting. Not just another slasher flick. It's a really neat take on the slasher flick. Did I think it executed it perfectly? Is it genre
Yeah.
defining? Is it is it going to change people's worlds? No, I don't think so. But it was a neat. I That's another thing too. I give points for originality, right? And it certainly is. It's an original. It's a neat idea. Basket case aside.
And yeah, and for me, like it's kind of comparing it to other James Wan works, like The
Yeah.
Conjuring. Conjuring, I don't remember what I rated. It's probably 4.5 stars. Insidious, I've gone back to Insidious a few times. Am I going to go back to Malignant? If there's more of them, I'm probably going to rewatch this first one. But immediately I'm thinking in my mind, oh, is this something that I'll want to purchase on disc? Is this something I want to revisit? Is this something I want to get my other friends to watch? And it's like, yes and no. I'm going to recommend people watch this movie. I'm probably not going to buy this unless it's in the $5 bin. Am I going to rewatch it in a few years? But it's not, I don't think it's going to be as memorable as a lot of the other horror
Yeah.
movies that I've been consuming lately. So that's where I end up with a 3.5 star. I might watch it in 2 years' time and think, man, that was not nearly as much fun as I had the first time around. Maybe it goes down to 3, or maybe I just appreciate it more for what it is and it goes up to a solid 4 just for the fun factor alone.
Yeah.
That's where
I
I'm at.
mean, even something like, and we've talked before, and I'm not a huge fan of the real life Warrens, Ed and Lorraine Warren, on who the Conjuring films are based. But like in separating out like art from the actual source material, like the Conjuring films are still like 1 and 2. Those are great, like movies about ghosts or demons and stuff. Like I can, like
Yeah.
I'm probably gonna go back and watch those this Halloween. Actually, I was gonna go. I want to rewatch those after
Yeah.
rewatching the third one there. Maybe do a watch of the Conjuring universe because that's like 7 films now or 8 films now.
There's a lot of them now. Yeah.
But yeah, even with my complete dislike of Ed and Lorraine Warren in real life as people, I still like The Conjuring. For me is like that stands out. That's a really great horror movie. And I don't think that
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to revisit that movie. I mean, I am going to revisit The Conjuring. I know that. But am I going to revisit Malignant? I don't have the same urge to rewatch that, I don't think. Let's say like the Saw movies.
Yeah.
I'm going to watch Saw again for sure. Right? I'm definitely, it's on the list. I love that movie. But like Malignant, I didn't get the same vibes. I didn't get that same.
Yeah.
It wasn't the same caliber, I don't think.
You have anything else to add to this conversation over Malignant?
A message to James Wan, like keep making movies, keep coming up with original ideas, and keep honing your craft. Because I think that, I mean, James Wan is one of those people, like he slides under the radar, but he is one of the most, like outside of the MCU, I think was the Conjuring universe is really the only other really successful shared movie universe has been created and sustained over any length of films, right?
It's true. The quality is
Might be something else.
A little iffy there with some of those entries, but you know what, they're doing it. And the thing is, the budget just allows them to do things like that. It's just like, all right, I'm on board.
Yeah,
I'm subscribed.
Quality issues aside, potentially, I haven't seen all the other movies, but like he successfully. Like James Wan and Kevin Feige are essentially right now the only people who've successfully kind of ushered in successful movie universes. People have been trying to do this, cinematic universes. So yeah.
And definitely horror movies, I think, honestly, are easier to franchise. Historically, it's like even though Friday the 13th was made without any ambition for sequels, it's like easier to just come up with excuses to throw more movies on and keep going more and more and more. Halloween, Friday the 13th, etc. It's just like, we're fine. Yeah, we're fine with getting more of this
honestly,
stuff.
I'd rather watch James Wan try something new and not quite succeed than watch another Halloween sequel that is pretty good. Because I don't want to I don't want to just watch the same three franchises over and over again. I want to watch new original ideas. And I think giving people like James Wan and other people and other filmmakers like him chances to try new things. I mean, they're not always going to be successful, but I think that's really important. And I think him kind of like earning that goodwill to go out and try new things is really important in helping to push forward, not just the horror genre, but filmmaking in general, right? And being able to try those new ideas and potentially fail, not really succeed, but getting those new ideas out there and pushing that envelope a little bit, right?
Honestly, it was almost a relief when I finished watching this. It's like, oh, they did not tie this into the Conjuring universe. They did not tie it into Insidious. It's like, this isn't some secret like Conjuring movie that they just slipped in under the radar. It's like, no, this is its own thing. And thank you for doing that.
Absolutely.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Real Film Chronicles podcast. Thank you for listening and hanging out with us today. We really appreciate your support and look forward to you joining us for the next episode. We can be found around the internet and social media, with our home base being realfilmchronicles.com, which will have all the links you need to follow and keep in touch with us. If you have a moment, we'd really appreciate if you could leave some feedback, such as a rating on Apple Podcasts or on whatever platform you're listening on. And feel free to send us an email to realfilmchronicles@outlook.com. We love some suggestions, questions, or general comments and would enjoy including them on an upcoming episode. Until next time, take care of yourself and others and keep your film journey going.